11-year-old Krista Lee Harrison lived in Marshallville, Ohio, which is a small agricultural community, and at the time of Christa's death in 1982, it had a population of around 750 people. It was considered a tight-knit community where everybody knows each other, and also a safe area where nothing major happened, where crime was concerned. However, that was about to change. Krista Lee Harrison was often seen hanging around the softball field, which was directly across the street from where she lived. On July 17, 1982, Krista and a friend Roy was seen collecting aluminium cans to sell. Krista's friend Roy went over to go and get a drink. He saw a van stop next to Krista. The guy was seen trying to speak to her, and then all of a sudden, Roy saw Krista being forced into the van before it took off. The friend then ran back to Krista's parents' house, who in turn called the police. Within hours of Krista's abduction, police had set up roadblocks and issued an all-points bulletin for the vehicle, which was described by Krista's friend as a dark reddish-brown van with bubble-shaped rear windows. The friend described the abductor as a white male of 25 to 35 with dark curly hair and a moustache. The many volunteers that quickly got involved started to search all areas, including local waterways. The police had assumed it would be a ransom, so they had set up separate phone lines so they could record the caller if this person rang, demanding money, etc. Unfortunately, the call they were waiting for never came. 6 days went by with nothing on Krista's whereabouts. This was about to change for the worse when 13 miles away in Holmes County, 2 turtle-trapping hunters were in a deserted field. They found a decomposing remains of a young girl with her legs wrapped around in a clear plastic bag. Police were called immediately. Investigators found a pair of black leather gloves, men's blue jeans with the blue and beige specks of paint, and a plaid shirt. Just a couple of miles away, searchers found a beach towel with a clump of hair and a cardboard box with blood and black spray paint on it. The body was identified as 11-year-old Krista Lee Harrison. The autopsy showed that Krista had been strangled and sexually assaulted. In Krista's hair, beach towel and clothing, orange fibres had been found. One particular forensic scientist, Jeffrey Lynn, noted that he'd seen these orange fibres before, and that was to do with the murder of 12-year-old Tina Harmon case, just 8 months earlier. On October the 29th, 1981, 12-year-old Tina Marie Harmon had been raped and strangled, and her body was found on the side of the road, in a town not far from where Krista's body had been found. Orange fibres were found on Tina's body, and these stood out to the forensic scientist, as these were a trilobal fibre, which is a triangle shape. It would direct light to your eyes, creating more of a sheen, and this fibre is most likely used for carpet. The problem with the Tina Harmon's and Christa Harrison's murders possibly being connected was that 2 men called Herman Ray Rucker and Ernest Holbrook Jr. had already been convicted of Tina's death and was actually in police custody at the time of Krista's death. Herman Ray Rucker and Ernest Holbrook Jr. was serving a life sentence for Tina's death. The conviction of Herman Rucker and Ernest Holbrook surrounding Tina's death had been circumstantial, but we'll go into that a little bit later. But this now had investigators questioning whether they had convicted the wrong men, and if this was the case, then did they have a serial killer on the loose, free to kill again on the farmlands of Ohio? When Krista's body was found in Holmes County, investigators only had a couple of clues to go on. Firstly, the description of the reddish-brown van with bubble-shaped side windows, also the orange carpet fibres found in Krista's hair and beach towel. Although when these fibres were tested and compared to the orange fibres found on Tina Harmon's body, tests showed that they were the same. This now made investigators nervous, as it seemed likely that the girls had been abducted and killed by the same person. Attention was now turned to the clear plastic bag that was wrapped around Krista's ankles. The plastic seemed a little unusual because of the thickness and the way it had folds from the manufacturing process. Eventually, this bag was traced to a factory in Pioneer, Ohio, which in turn was used to package black leather custom seats for vans. These seats were sold through Sears in their mail order catalogue. This also included the cardboard used for shipping that was found not far from Krista's body. Investigators now could go through Sears records and find out which residents in Ohio had purchased these seats in the months preceding the abduction. As it turned out, there were only 23 people that ordered these black leather seats, but none owned the van described by Roy, Krista's friend. Also, the trail of the orange fibres had also gone cold. The town of Marshallville mourned the death of Krista Lee Harrison, and the community felt on edge, and for the first time, people felt unsafe, and not a single child walked alone. The town had turned quiet like a ghost town, and everybody wondered if the killer would strike again. It took police an entire year before they got the break they needed, so in 1983, 50 miles from where Krista was abducted, a woman only going by her first name Debbie, a manager of a local gas station from Salem, was doing some maintenance work outside when she was abducted at gunpoint. She was driven to a location unknown to her. Debbie was beaten and her head was shaved. Assaulted and tortured for hours. Her limbs had been handcuffed and tied to the bed. It had now been 12 hours. When her torturer had told her he had to go out. When he left, Debbie's will to survive took over immediately before the abductor came back. Debbie had managed to free her hands and legs and fled. Not knowing where she was or where she was going, Debbie prayed, when all of a sudden she could hear a dog barking. Realising that's where she could get help, she ran to the house where the barking was coming from, where a lady called Mrs. Smith immediately got help by calling the police. Debbie identified her abductor as Robert Anthony Buell. Anthony Buell, aged 43, worked for the city of Akron, Ohio, in the planning department. He pleaded no contest to the charge of kidnapping and rape of Debbie. As time went on, police found out that Debbie wasn't the only victim. When his face was seen on TV, other women had come forward, saying he had done similar things to them. He would then drive them close to where they lived and then release them. Police went to Buell's home to do a search to see what else they could find, and behind his couch a rolled up orange carpet was found, which matched the carpet in Buell's van. Also blue paraffin wax, which might be connected to another child murder of that same year, which was now 1983. Police had already noticed he had been driving a brown van with the orange carpet in the back. The only difference was that it didn't have bubble-shaped side windows at the back. However, later neighbours had told police that not long after Krista's death, Buell had changed the bubble-shaped windows to rectangular sliding windows. There is now a strong connection to Krista Harrison's death as well, although he had denied abducting Krista. Now that police had discovered the orange carpet in the back of the van for the first time, police had something to compare the orange fibres to. Although this carpet wasn't particularly unique, as quite a few Ohio residents had this for offices and houses, etc., prosecutors had to find what else could link the fibres to the carpet. Inside Buell's home, police found more evidence. Jeans with the same wear and tear patterns, size and make as the discarded jeans found near Krista's body. Not only that, but the discarded jeans that had the specks of paint on had matched the walls of Buell's home. Black spray paint found in Buell's garage matched the spray paint on the cardboard also found near Krista. All the fibres found on Krista's hair, cardboard and towel was compared, and it was traced to a carpet manufactured from J.P. Stevens Company in Canton, Ohio. Only 12,000 square yards of carpet had been produced. As this orange carpet didn't seem very popular, records show that out of the 12,000 square yards, only 74 square yards was shipped to Ohio. Prosecutors think that after abducting Krista, Buell had taken her to his home. After murdering her, he placed her in plastic bags used for his van seats, then put her in a cardboard shipping box that contained those seats. Buell then drove the 30 miles outside of town to Holmes County and dumped Krista in the field. Buell then had discarded the jeans and shirt a little further away. Although when tests were done on Krista's body, it indicated that her body had been left somewhere in high temperatures. Most likely, her body had been kept in the vehicle for days before being dumped. On April 4, 1984, the jury found Robert Anthony Buell guilty of kidnapping, sexual assault and murder by strangulation and was sentenced to death. What was interesting was in the testimony of Ralph Ross Jr., aged 20, Robert's nephew, had said that he had lived at Robert's house in 1982 as he had just moved from Mingo Junction near Steubenville. At this time, Robert Buell stayed with his girlfriend during the summer in 1982. Therefore, he gave Ralph Ross Jr. the run of his house, which would mean taking out the garbage, etc. In the report, it came out that both men had plotted to kidnap women, tying them up and putting a gag in their mouths to do things to them, and all of this to be done in Buell's van. As it turned out, both men shared the same fantasies. Ralph had admitted that they would both talk about doing this to women. It might have been worth noting that Robert Buell sold his old van, which did have bubble-shaped rear windows, to Ralph Ross Jr., his nephew, in 1980, who ended up staying at Robert Buell's home from February 1982. But Robert also got another van, which was very similar. I have not been able to find anything to suggest that Ralph Ross Jr. was looked into as a person of interest by investigators after this. Now going back to discuss Tina Harmon's case in more detail, which was 9 months before Christa's death, on 29th of October 1981, Tina Harmon from Creston was in the car with her brother, who was given her a lift to meet with friends in Lodi. She was dropped off at a convenience store, and at 6:30, Tina and her friends all decided to walk up to meet some more friends. On the way, they passed by another store, which Tina told the others to walk on and she would catch them up, as she wanted to go and buy a fudgesicle. After this point, Tina was never to be seen again. Investigations into the whereabouts of Tina noted that the convenience store owner recalled that when Tina left the store, she was being followed by a man in his 20s or 30s. Finally, on November the 3rd, 14 miles away from Lodi, in Navarra, Bethlehem Township, a hunter named Herbert Seifert, who was tracking a deer through a field near an oil well, came upon the body of a young girl. Unfortunately, Tina's family's fears were confirmed when the body was identified as Tina Harmon. Autopsy results showed that she'd been raped and strangled. Results also showed carpet fibres and dog hair on Tina's clothing. There were 4 eyewitnesses altogether. 2 eyewitnesses reported that they had seen a girl struggling to get away from a vehicle which was driven by Ernest Holbrook and Herman Rucker. It wasn't until she saw the news about Tina Harmon she realised that they had possibly witnessed Tina's abduction. Both men were arrested and held in police custody until the trial. In the trial, another witness called Curtis Maynard, who knew both men, said he was driven to the site by Holbrook and Rucker and shown the body of Tina. Then the last witness was a woman named Susan Siegler, who said that on the 30th of October she had turned down the sexual advances of Rucker and Holbrook, only to be told that they had killed Tina, and showed her a picture of Tina Harmon's body. Susan Siegler's testimony came under doubt because so many people testified about the reliability of Susan's testimony and how she had a reputation as a liar by a lot of people who knew her. This included 2 ex-husbands, an aunt and 2 police officers. Though carpet fibres and dog hair found on Tina's body could not be found on anything owned by Rucker or Holbrook, in June 1982, the jury saw fit to still convict the 2 men and sentence them to life in prison. During the time of the 2 men in prison, Christa Harrison was abducted and murdered. Now, after the arrest of Robert Buell for the abduction and assault on the Salem garage manager Debbie, investigators believed that Robert Buell was also the suspect for Tina Harmon, because eventually the carpet fibres that were found on Tina and Christa matched, which meant they had to have been killed by the same person. This was all evidence needed to prove that Herman Rucker and Ernest Holbrook had no connection to Tina's death. Investigators also dug up Robert Buell's dog from the garden that had died months earlier to compare with the dog hairs found on Tina, which were a match. Herman Rucker and Ernest Holbrook Jr. won a new trial on the basis that the same orange fibres that were on Christa were also on Tina Harmon. They were both later acquitted. Herman Rucker in June 1983 and Ernest Holbrook was acquitted in May 1985. Robert Buell was the new suspect involved in Tina's murder. Although Buell denied this, and Robert Buell unfortunately did not get charged with Tina's murder, not until finally, in 2010, more advanced DNA testing proved that Robert's DNA was on Tina Harmon's clothing. However, Robert Buell had already been executed by lethal injection 8 years earlier on the 24th of September 2002 for Christa Harrison's death. Another death of a child was also possibly linked to Buell, and that was 10-year-old Debbie K. Smith, who on the 25th of June 1983 went missing from a local street fair in downtown Massillon, whilst with her brother David. As they both went to get a drink from a drink stand, David turned to ask her what she wanted and realised she had gone. Debbie's body was found 6 weeks later, 10 miles south of Massillon, on a riverbank, although I can't seem to find a record of how Debbie died. However, the reason why there is a possible link to Robert Buell is because the blue paraffin wax found on Debbie's body was the same blue paraffin wax that was found in the basement of Robert Buell's home. Robert Buell always denied killing Krista Lee Harrison, and it is very interesting to note that through research into police records by investigative journalists, it has come to light that Ralph Ross, who was living at Buell's home, had taken a day off work on that day. The evidence from Christa was being dumped, which was witnessed by someone who hadn't realised at the time what they saw, not until it came to light that Christa's body had been found. And that's when the witness put two and two together and realised they had seen a person who must have been dumping evidence. Although this witness couldn't identify the person doing this, they were able to put a time to when this took place. And also that same day, Robert Buell was buying a dryer in Akron, and a receipt was found to prove this. 6 days later, Ralph Ross Jr., Buell's nephew, actually left town, and he moved back to Mingo Junction to live with his mother, never returning to Akron. Roy, Krista's friend, said in police reports it wasn't Robert Buell he had seen, but someone who looked like him. Now, Ralph Ross Jr. had dark hair and had a moustache at the time, which was similar description as what Roy gave at the time of Krista's abduction. It was Ross's van that had bubble windows, though Robert's was similar. The orange carpet fibres were found in both vans, and the same as the dog hair, as Robert had let the dog sleep in his van before he sold the van to Ralph Ross Jr. in 1980. Now we know that Robert was the one that killed Tina Harmon, and he was convicted of Krista's death, but it does beg the question, was his nephew also involved? Let's face it would be hard not to know something if a murder was being committed in the same house as you're living in. Ralph Ross Jr. also expressed the fact that he had the same thoughts and fantasies for kidnapping and assaulting women using Robert's van. Considering blue paraffin wax, which was found on the body of Debbie Smith, was also found in the basement of Buell's home, which both men had access to. Just one more interesting thing to note is that Ralph Ross Jr. used to work with his mother, making little trinkets and selling them at fairs and carnivals, etc., around the time Debbie Smith went missing. The fact that Ralph was living at Robert's home in the summer of 1982, the same time Christa had been abducted, may be something that should have been looked into more. Love it if you could like and subscribe. I'll be posting new content each week, and I hope you have a great day. If you want to email me with any more cases, I'll be happy to research and put it on my channel. My email is in the description.